This is Simone.
And this is Katinka.
And you are listening to the Novatech podcast. We live in a time when technology is changing faster than ever before and transforming the way we live and interact with the world. The question is, how do we keep up?
In this podcast, we'll interview real people and certainly hear their tips on how to learn, adapt, and succeed in this ever-changing world of technology. Are you ready?
Hello everyone. Today we welcome Emma Sharrock, a former Naval Officer who today is a change leader, Agile Coach, and consultant. She's passionate about working with organizations and helping them achieve successful change. Emma is a published author of 3 books on Agile and Leadership that we'll discuss with her in this episode. Welcome to the podcast, Emma.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited about being here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
We know you had an interesting and rather unusual path. Please tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So I started my career in the Royal Australian Navy, and I was in the Navy for 9 years. I was a maritime warfare officer. So my specialty was navigation and warfare. So my job was to navigate the ship. My main place that I worked was on the bridge or in the operations room. After doing that for a number of years, I went ashore and worked in maritime headquarters and ran a couple of projects. And I really fell in love with project management. And it's funny, I had this sort of moment, and it was while I was at sea and my ship was de-ammunitioning. So it's when you come back from a big deployment and the missiles that you didn't use, you de-ammunition. So get it off the ship, which is the most boring thing you can ever do. Watching a missile leave a ship. So it takes 30 minutes to move a missile from the ship onto the boat that takes it away. And I remember just sitting there and watching this process because an officer needed to be there, several officers needed to be there. And I remember looking up at the Sydney skyline and seeing all these buildings and thinking, I wonder what it would be like to work there. And it was just this moment that I just kind of snapshot in my head. And fast forward a couple of years, I ran a few projects in the Navy and really liked it, and then decided that I wanted to do that more. So I wanted to do it outside the Navy. So I left the Navy and went into consulting, did consulting and then contract project management, lived in the UK for a couple of years running projects. But I really found I love the people side of projects because, as we know, even the most simple system change is a massive people change. So I really fell in love with that. So when I came back to Australia, I did my coaching qualification and started doing coaching. And then I was assigned an Agile project in the 2000s at some point. And I remember I had to Google Agile because I wasn't sure what it was. And I remember when I read about it, I thought, wow, this is so cool. This is all the stuff I've been learning in coaching about how important it is to, communicate, get feedback, to, really understand the environment. And I really sort of started to work, how do I bring all this together? So I started doing coaching and was running a number of Agile projects. And then I had an opportunity to work with Rob Tomset, who is pretty famous in Agile circles. And I worked with him for 3 years and loved it, learned so much about Agile in that time. And after that, I thought, I just can't go back. So while I loved working at NAB, I was at NAB for 3 years as an Agile coach. I remember being really curious and thinking, I wonder if I could do this somewhere else. Because you know how when you work for one organization for so long, you think, could I do this somewhere else? So I decided to go out on my own. And it was funny, just going back to that moment of when I looked up at the buildings from my ship. I was running a big training at NAB right before I left. And it was in a building that looked out onto the harbour, and there was a ship in harbour de-ammunitioning. I remember looking down and going, oh, I know what it's like to work in one of these buildings now. So it was a real sort of moment of progress and just sort of change. And change has been so much part of what I've done. It just sort of it felt like everything had kind of integrated at that point. So that's what brought me to Agile and coaching. And I guess what prompted me was just, so much of what I'd done in the Navy was about change. And I guess I felt that I had so much to add value somewhere else. So that was, my journey into projects and then Agile and then coaching and what I do now for organizations, which I absolutely love.
That's great. As you were talking, I just thought of when you had, after you left the Navy and you were in the corporate world working, have you felt that the moment that, oh yes, this is exactly what I thought when I was, still in the Navy doing that? Is you went back in time and said, well, this is exactly what I thought when I think of changing? Has that happened?
Yeah, it's a really great question, because I don't know whether I really thought about what it would be like. It was more of a question that, looking up at the buildings going, I wonder. And then I think it was that moment when I looked back down and went, oh, I'm here. There's probably been a few moments where I've realized that I probably didn't appreciate the amount of responsibility that I had when I was in the Navy, because it was my job. So I was on the bridge of a ship, the captain, Commodore Simon Hart, and I didn't probably appreciate that, he pretty much gave me the keys to the ship, and I was able to do what I needed to do. And it was only afterwards, when I went to corporate and I needed like 3 signatures to put a post-it note in a wall, that I thought, oh, wow, this is actually really different. And I really appreciate the responsibility that I had, and the scope of opportunities I had as an officer in the Navy. So I guess there are a few moments where I thought, wow, this is amazing. I'm in corporate and I'm doing more coaching. I'm running projects. I'm doing all this cool stuff. And I feel like life is great. But there's also those moments of, oh, I really appreciate the role I had when I was in the Navy, and I probably didn't appreciate it at the time. So yeah, a bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm also curious, how easy or difficult was this change for you? Do you have any regrets? Like, was it difficult for you to leave this previous career behind? And did you learn any lessons along the way, or do you have any takeaways from this career change?
Yeah, initially it was really hard, because when I decided to leave, I thought, this is what I want to do. And I had a few options and different job opportunities, but I really struggled to put into words the value that I could bring outside the context of the Navy. So there were a few frustrations when I'd be like in an interview, and it'd be a recommendation from someone who said, oh, you've got to get Emma in, she's amazing. But then I had a lot of trouble explaining what it was I did. So it's, how do you distill, 9 years of leadership, of operational, of all this experience into something that a recruiter or an HR director would understand. So I did struggle at first. I did think, oh, maybe this wasn't a good decision. And the job I'd left in the Navy had been amazing. I'd loved it. I just knew that it wasn't what I needed to do going forward. So I knew that the change was the right thing to do, but I struggled to translate my experience into something that was understandable outside the military.
And I think in terms of what Katinka asked, in terms of tangible takeaways.
Yeah, takeaways. So I guess probably the big one is, I guess, taking the time to reflect and knowing your worth. So, and sometimes that takes a bit of self-reflection to think, okay, well, what have I achieved? What value did I bring? And how do I make that tangible in this context? And a story I often tell at the start of my Agile trainings is, I talk about how proud I am that when I was in the Navy, I was really good at astronavigation, quite good at it. Completely not helpful to anything I do now, of course. But what it taught me was, in astronavigation, you make mathematical calculations based upon the premise that you stand still and everything around you moves. So you do the calculations based upon the planets and all celestial bodies moving around you, which we know is not true, but that's the only way the maths can work. But it puts you in the center. And my reflection is that every environment we're in, there's a different context that we need to consider. So there's a different set of beliefs, possibly even values, that we need to sort of try on and say, okay, well, this is me in this context. How do I operate, and what are some of the parameters? So although I'm not navigating by the stars, every client I work with, every environment I find myself in, I'm like, what are the, where am I, and what might I need to believe in order for this to work for me? So the big takeaway there is that, yeah, we find ourselves in different environments all the time. So how do we make sense of that? How do we understand the context, and we're able to move forward and get results? So that's probably the big takeaway that kind of blends in with my experience in the Navy.
Nice. Yeah, as you were saying, I think exactly, it's the change, right? Is to adapt. So what you need to learn to adapt in order to succeed. But I think, as you were saying, with all this math calculation, probably it's easier doing all that than sometimes working with some people around you, because there's so many variables with people.
Totally. But with Astro, I could say, you know what? I know the math says that I'm standing still on the earth and all these celestial bodies are moving around me, but that's not true. The truth is the earth is moving at a ridiculous speed per hour through, so But if I fought that, I would never get the math to work. So I sometimes think that when we're dealing with complexities in our workplace, there's all these things, we sort of have to say, well, where am I, and what is everything relative to me? And because if you fight it and go, well, this is what's really happening, there's like this thing and that thing, and it's just too many moving parts to deal with. But if you can sort of pause and say, well, okay, where am I, and what do I need to believe, and how do I need to think in this context? I think that simplifies it. But you're right, Simone, it doesn't simplify it completely. The workplace is complex. There are so many personalities and different skill sets and different agendas, and that can be really challenging as well. So I'm definitely not oversimplifying it, saying there's a simple formula. If there was, it'd be amazing. I would sell it. It would be incredible. Maybe we could come up with that together.
Yeah, I would do an analogy with all that. In the first time that you are learning to drive a car, you have so many things to pay attention that you're not used to, that of course you become overwhelmed. But at the end of the day, after a few sessions, you are becoming more familiar with all the things, and everything is easier for you. And after some time, might be different to different people, but at the end of the day, everyone gets that, comfortable, that you can talk to other people, you can listen to a radio, and doing all that at the same time. So things haven't changed, they are the same, but our perception with our experience, that has changed.
Yes, that's a really good analogy. I remember the first time I hopped on the bridge of a ship, the officer of the watch was doing something. They were navigating the ship and they were giving conning orders, and there was something happening over here and there was a ship over there. And I remember thinking, I will never be able to do that. It is way too complex. And fast forward, I think it was only 2 years. I remember I was on the bridge of a ship and we were in a tight formation with a bunch of other ships, and we had to land our helicopter. And I remember even the captain going, oh, we've got to land a helicopter. And I turned and the helicopter landed, and then we turned again, and the captain was like, that was amazing. And I had thought about when the helicopter was going to land and had thought about what the wind was and had kind of, calculated it in my head. But I remember thinking, that was pretty amazing. Like the me of 2 years ago would have said that's amazing. But for me, it was so much what I did. And it's exactly the same as driving a car. Yeah, when you see someone else driving, you think, oh, I could never do that. And suddenly, fast forward a couple of years, you're on the phone, or not on the phone because that's not allowed, sorry. You are listening to the radio, you're doing other things, and yeah, it becomes second nature because you're able to sort of simplify the complexity around you and focus on getting that thing done, and you do it more easily. You become sort of that unconscious competence layer, which is that natural kind of ability, which seems natural, but it's not. It comes from practice. And I think we probably don't appreciate the practice and the work that goes into getting to that point. Like whenever you see someone operating in their genius, it's not, they didn't magically land there. They've practiced it. There's been time spent probably not doing it very well at all, possibly even making mistakes, but they're now at that point, and we don't always see that, but we see the finished product and we think it's incredible, but there's a lot of practice to it. And I think I'm lucky. I've had several opportunities to be a learner, to be the person who doesn't know how to do it and then be able to master something and go, oh, I can do it. And I love that feeling, which is probably why I love training people, because I love the feeling of bringing someone to that point, from the point of I don't know this to I know this. And that's an amazing feeling.
Yeah, that's so true. And I really love this example. So besides maths and physics, are there any practices or habits from your past as a naval officer that you can also apply in your agile coaching role? And if there are, what are those and how are you using and implementing them?
Well, that's a really good question. I think there's probably more practices than probably what I realize, because I think sometimes I don't think about it consciously. So I think about the time as a naval officer, like you think about navigating, there's a plan, you've got to act on it. I think often when you're at sea and you have a plan, sometimes the plan doesn't quite go to plan, so you have to adapt. And I think so much of working in an agile way is about, let's make a plan, but let's assume that things aren't going to go great. So let's just do the next thing. So there's been plenty of times on a ship, off a ship in the Navy, where we've had to adapt. And I think I probably quite practiced at adapting and accepting that things will need to change and biting off small pieces. And that's probably for my personal life too. When I have a personal goal, I think, well, what's the small things I can do to get to that goal, as opposed to thinking, oh, I'm doing this thing and it's going to be hard. So it's just those small steps and adapting as I go, which is really important.
On your LinkedIn profile, you talk about disruption in relation to change. This is quite a relevant topic in today's COVID climate. So I'm curious when and how did you realize change was an important topic for you to learn about, important enough to even make it your career, to help other people through the process of change?
Yeah, I'm probably really lucky. So my father was in the Air Force. My mother was in the Air Force too. So we moved around a lot as children. So I experienced change so much as a child. But of course, your childhood is your childhood, so you don't think it's any different. You just think that's normal. So we moved every couple of years. We were lucky we didn't move heaps compared to some Air Force families. So I experienced change at a young age. And when I went to university, when I went to the Defence Force Academy, I studied information systems and management. And in my honours year, I was really attracted to the concept of change management, because even in those short 3 years at the academy, I experienced so much change, and the topic fascinated me. So my thesis for my honours year was all about the management of change, and particularly around the involvement of people. I think about my thesis now, it's very naive. It was written in 1994. It's probably not, I think, man, it was probably very naive, but I studied a whole bunch of Navy projects and other military projects, and came to the conclusion that when you involve people in change, the change goes better, which of course probably not, anything exciting, but just the topic, I think, because I'd experienced change myself, but I think even then I recognized just how much change was happening. I think if we think about our lives now, I just sort of feel like it's sped up. And I think probably back then I was thinking, wow, everything's happening so fast, but probably in hindsight, it was quite slow in comparison. So the topic of change has fascinated me since then, since 1994, my thesis topic. And I think ever since then, it's just continued to fascinate me, because I've noticed the changes around me and really been quite aware of the changes I've experienced, in myself, in my career, in my life. And I've wanted to deal with them in the best way I could. So I've thought about ways I could, and then I've wanted to help people do that too, and I think even in my personal life as well as in projects, I've recognized that, as I said at the start, even the simplest tech project, really simple, small change can end up being a big people change. So, for me, it's like, how do we do that well? Like for me, it was always, well, if we could do that better, like how would we do it? And that's been a source of fascination, which I think I've always been drawn to it, which is why it's probably made up a big part of, my career and my business.
Yeah, so in relation to your thesis, you mentioned that when you involve people, change is better. So could you elaborate a little bit on that, what you mean?
Yeah, sure. So when I picked my thesis topic, I sort of went through that process of thinking, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about change. And I went to Maritime Headquarters and did like a bit of a study session where I had a sponsor, and I was able to spend some time with some people there. And I found it really interesting when I searched through the project files because I was able to look at projects that had finished, and some of the projects that had been very people centric, very much involving the people that were going to be impacted. I was really amazed at just looking at the data of like, wow, the projects that did that so much more successful in terms of implementation, and the projects that didn't were terrible. And I guess it's something, we can all sort of look at each other now and go, yeah, like we know that we've worked in these environments and we can see that. But I know I feel probably quite lucky that it was really before I entered the workplace properly. I remember I hadn't worked in an office or anything. I was at the academy and I hadn't even been to sea at that point, apart from for a short trip. So I didn't have a lot of experience, but I could start to see about the importance of involving people. And I think even though that was the premise of my thesis, I remember after that always thinking, who do I need to involve that's going to make this better? And that's what I've always thought to do. And I think hopefully I'm asking those questions that maybe others don't think about because they're thinking about other things. So that's always been important to me.
Well, talking about the disruption, if you can talk about this, how do you actually help organizations to adapt and change? Can you share some tips with us in terms of how can organizations embrace the change and strive in today's crisis?
Yeah, I think the big one is helping organizations accept that the disruption is happening, because a lot of organizations I work with, especially early in my corporate career, were just sort of almost a bit in denial that anything was changing that much. It was like, oh, it's not changing that much, it's all okay. So I think a lot of it's helping them accept that things are changing. And I think a lot of what I do is helping them visualize where they want to be, because I always think about a change as, change is consistent. We're always going through some kind of change. And I think, this recent pandemic has really accelerated that, but I think it was always accelerating. So we're always experiencing something. It's just got faster and faster. But when we think about going into a change, the question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we want to be after this? Accepting there'll be more change, but when we go into, a massive change or a massive challenge, we can come out. I always think there's sort of three ways we can come out of it, or there's three ways that it can end. We can come out stronger, we can come out weaker, or we can never come out of it. We can stay in this churn, we can stay in this cycle. So the value is sort of thinking about, how do we want to come out of it? What do we want to achieve from this? Because I think it's important to recognize the problem, but then go, okay, what do we do about that? And how are we going to look after our people through this? And I know a lot of organizations say people are our most valuable asset. They really are. So how do we look after our most important asset through this? And I think the value is I ask those questions and I help them with strategies to make a plan for what they want to achieve, and then help them do that through whether it be capability uplift or consulting or training or coaching. It's really sort of helping them. What's the next thing they need to do, and that's often where I go to next. It's what's the goal, and then what do we need to do, and taking those small steps to get there.
Would then, of course, being simplistic, but similar to start with the end in mind, like asking how you will finish first.
Yeah. I totally believe in starting with the end in mind. I'm a bit, even when things aren't going well, I'm always thinking, no matter how good things are, how bad things are, starting with the end in mind. So Stephen Covey, massive fan of his, and that's a big mantra of his, I know, and also of me, is starting with that end in mind. Because I think if we can't visualize the end, if we can't think about what it looks like, we don't know when we're there, which means we could actually be doing great work, but we won't know when we're finished because we don't know what the finish looks like. I mean, in really simplistic terms, you think about athletes, they'll imagine the whole race. If you think about a 100-meter sprinter, they'll imagine putting their feet in the blocks and pushing off from the blocks and running and then crossing the line. They've visualized all that. So when it's all so clear. And I know a lot of what we do in whether it be change initiatives in corporate, it's not as simple as that, but at the same time, it's visualizing what does that finish line look like so that when we're there, we know we're there.
Yeah, I don't remember who said something similar to this. If you cannot achieve that in your mind, you won't be able to achieve it in real life.
Yeah, there's an expression, I think it goes, if the mind can conceive it, you can achieve it. But yeah, you've got to conceive it in your mind first, because otherwise it doesn't exist. If it doesn't exist anywhere, then it hasn't happened. You've got to be able to visualize it in some way. Yeah, and in NLP we often talk about, so I've done neurolinguistic programming, we often talk about a strategy. So a strategy you need to be able to visualize, and you need to put all your senses around it. So you need to be able to see it, hear it, feel it. But a strategy finishes with a feeling. The feeling is the last thing that happens. So it's not necessarily just knowing what it's going to look like and what it's going to sound like, but how you're going to feel. And that's the thing that seals it, to go, okay, I'm going to feel this way. And that's important as well.
Yeah, I love that topic. Yeah, I've done the NLP practitioner as well, but that's for another day, another conversation.
It is, yes, I love that as well. Yeah.
So we were talking about organizations, but organizations are run by people. So change is becoming more and more important in today's world. So do you think this is almost like a skill that we should really actively try to work on and develop? And if yes, how can we learn to deal with change, and how can we prepare for change?
Yeah, I think it's such a skill. And I guess through the course of my career, I've been, lucky enough to have experienced a lot of it. So I guess I've had some practice. I remember working with someone years ago, and he'd worked for the same organization on the same floor of the same building for 30 years. And there was a building move happening that involved moving. We were still staying on the same floor, but we were just moving to a separate area. And he was quite resistant. He was saying, but I've worked here for 30 years. I don't want to move. And I remember thinking, and that was nothing against him. That's just his world. So I think he hadn't had the practice. I guess I think about change a little bit like, you go to the gym and you do a bicep curl and your biceps get stronger. And the more bicep curls you do, the more stronger your biceps get. And then if someone asks you to lift something, you're probably more likely to lift it because you've got the strength. So I think, being change fit it takes practice, and I think it is a skill that we all need to master, because there's so much change happening, and I think the more able we are to deal with that, to be resilient, to be able to take that on, it's important. And I think a lot of that comes down to, and I think the way we can train for that is by breaking our work down to small pieces. So doing small things, and those small wins, you do something, go, yes, I did it. And the more you are able to achieve those small things, the more resilience and the more self-efficacy you can build up. And we know from research that you build up a sense of self-efficacy in one area, like I'm really good at this thing. It means that if something else happens over here, you're confident, even though you might not know how to do that particular thing. So I think it is an important skill, and I think we can build it by experiencing change ourselves, by going through change, by doing small things and doing them often and then celebrating them. And I think that's how we build up a resilience and an ability to continue to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I like your analogy with the biceps, so basically the exercise in the gym, because at the end of the day, it's consistency. You are not going to make, if you go in one day, and spend 8 hours, for example, in the gym, you're not going to achieve your goal, right? Because because you are rusty, your muscles are rusty, so probably you won't be able to do much exercise after 1 hour. Then 2, because you'll be so sore, and the next day you won't be able to do either. So basically you lost some days in there because you want to do too much, rather than, okay, I do 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I go the next day again, 30 minutes. So exactly building that up, consistency, I think this is the key for these adaptations that will be running. And after some time, you build your muscle memory, and you don't even realize that you're doing that anymore. So yeah, great.
Yeah, consistency over time. I think one of the biggest enemies of change management is the montage. The montage, like if you think about Rocky, there's that whole, in the course of the song, Eye of the Tiger, he went from not being able to fight that well to being a champion. And that took a song. But of course it didn't, because there's all these clips of him doing different things like running and all that. So I think we see that and our minds go, well, that's like a 3-minute thing, when it's really, that was over a period of time. So I think we can be victims of the montage. We don't realize there's a lot of consistent practice that comes in. When I'm coaching teams and they first start doing, like, say, a daily stand-up, they'll do 2 and they'll think, oh, it's not really working for me. I'm like, you've done 2. Like, that's like going to the gym twice, as you said, and then not going again, going, well, this is not working for me. It's so important to keep up that consistent practice over time, and being willing to commit, and knowing that sometimes it's going to be hard, but they're the times that it's more important to do it. And that's when mastery happens, and that's when you get really good at what you do. And it sounds almost a bit boring, because it's like, oh, just do that and keep doing it, keep trying, keep persisting. But that's actually the secret. That's what we need to do, and we need to do it even when things are hard, even when we don't want to.
Yeah, so I guess you can just start small. Do you also think so when I think about what you're saying, I also imagine failure, because the more you try, the more you will fail also along the way, and that's how you build up your resilience. So do you think change and failure somehow go hand in hand, and are these the things that actually prepare you and teach you how to deal with change?
Yeah, I have a belief that there is no such thing as failure-only feedback. So we all fail at stuff. And I think probably the worst thing that can happen to us in our lives is that we never have an opportunity to fail. We have this amazing life where everything is good. I mean, we all think that's going to be amazing, but we don't have those opportunities to fail, because I think the times in my life when I've learned the most is when I have failed, when I've realized I've made a mistake and I have had that moment of, oh, and, I don't forget those moments, and that's what I learned from. So I think change and failure do go hand in hand. It's how do we then create environments where we enable those small failures to happen, so we're not allowing these monumental, organization kind of crushing failures to happen, but how do we sort of enable these small things to happen? We go, okay, that's a mistake, we've learned from that, we can move on, and people have those opportunities to create those memories and create those moments where they can learn, and then they're able to go, okay, now this is what I need to do next, and this is how I navigate my way through change. And I think that's really important, to be able to firstly have the mindset that failure is okay, and secondly create opportunities for failure to happen at a small scale, and you build it up like those small bicep curls. You build it up over time, so you become more tolerant, and you're able to I guess deal with bigger challenges as they arise.
Yeah, so we shouldn't call it failure, we should call it lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the big, I remember reading about something that happened at a European bank years ago, and the reason why it happened, and there were hundreds of millions of euros lost, and it was because the person who'd made the mistake had made a small mistake but didn't feel like they could say that they'd made the mistake. So they tried to fix it, and before we knew it, it was a international incident in the banking community. And I think we need to create environments where a person like that can speak up and say, okay, I have made a mistake. And that's a huge learning for that person. They will never make that mistake again. And they'll probably be a heaps better person for it. But we need to reframe it. We need to reframe it as a lesson so that we make it okay to learn and we get better people as a result, because our capability and our confidence improves.
Definitely. And the whole team and even the company grows and learns from that. Basically, being in a collaborative environment is the support you need, right, to make that happen.
Yeah. And that comes from the leaders as well. That comes from a leader role modeling that. I remember being on a ship years ago, and I remember being on watch, and someone thought they heard someone fall overboard. So they sounded the alarm. The whole ship got up. Everyone went to leaving ship stations, because that's how you account for everyone. So everyone was counted. Meanwhile, the ship turned around and the spotlight went out, and we were looking for this person who might have fallen overboard. And it takes a couple of minutes for everyone to be accounted for, because you've got to get everyone out of bed. And we accounted for everyone on the ship, so no one had fallen over the side, which was a relief. So we turned back around and went on our way. And the captain made an announcement, say, thanks so much, everyone. This person thought someone had fallen overboard, and he absolutely did the right thing by calling it. And that is why we have that person on that, playing that role. And we appreciate that, because if it had been a person, we would have turned just in time. As it turns out, it wasn't. But I encourage everyone, if they think that someone's fallen overboard, you need to call it out. So he really made a big point of saying that that person had done the right thing, because we want to reinforce that, yes, it was a mistake, but we want to encourage that behavior. If we start to shut that down and say, well, that was a bit silly, then we end up with an environment where people don't feel safe. And then, of course, you could end up leaving someone behind in the ocean, which is the worst possible outcome. So that's the sort of environment we want to foster.
So changing a little bit of gears here, you are an author of 3 books: The Agile Project Manager, The Agile Passion Project, How to Write a Book with Agile, and the last one, High Performance Executive Leadership, 10 Surprising Myths that Senior Executive must break to avoid irrelevance, which, by the way, I was in the launch.
You were. It was so good to have you there.
What made you decide to become an author? And did you have any aha moment when you realized that you wanted to write your first book? Or, what made you actually sit down and start writing, just going for it?
Yeah, I have always wanted to write a book. It's been something ever since I was a voracious reader when I was young. I've always wanted to write a book. And when I started working with Rob Tomset, he is an author of 3 books. And he asked me, he said, what are your goals? I know you're working in this job, and I said, actually, I really want to write a book. And he goes, well, I will help you. What's the book going to be about? And I went, I'm still working that out, but I do want to write a book. And he goes, he said, come to me with a model, like think about your model and I will help you. And that actually got me thinking. And then once the brain started thinking, I started to think about a model of what that would look like. And then it would have only been later that year, not a long period later, I was speaking at a PMI event, so Project Management Institute. And I was speaking about a number of concepts about projects and people and change. And someone asked, oh, is there a book I can find all this stuff in? This is really quite interesting. And I said, oh, well, not really, but I guess I should probably write that book. And then someone said, oh, when are you writing the book? And I went, oh, I will write a book and I'll have it done by the end of next year. The talk was in, I think, May that year. So I had until the end of the next year. So that was kind of like that. And it was the moment of, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I talk about that I feel like I wanted to put a container around it and say, well, and so my motivation was, if I could just sort of get into a book, then if someone wanted to understand what it was all about, I'm like, this is it. So that was, I guess, the aha moment. And I guess for me, the motivation was also, I thought about who I would write the book for. And I thought, I want to write the sort of book that I would have liked to have read when I first started in the corporate project environment. What are the things that I would have liked to have known? So it's called the Agile Project Manager. So it is very much about projects, agile projects, but at the same time, it's very much around managing change in people and how to do that. So I think for me, it was, what would my younger self want to know? And so that was my moment of just wanting to kind of condense and pull it all together in a book. And of course, the moment you publish the book, it immediately becomes outdated because I started to think about other things. But at the same time, it's still like, I had someone call me the other day, he'd just finished reading, and he said, I loved your book. And it just warmed my heart, because it was a wonderful book to write. And, even if only one person had said to me, that was a great book, I got a lot out of it, that would have been my job done. It was just the opportunity to help someone else. And yes, Simone's got a copy there. That just warmed my heart. And that's sort of that, when I thought about going into coaching, I always saw coaching as an opportunity to influence, like one to many. When I run a project, I've got my project team, and that's an awesome opportunity. But when I coach, it's an opportunity to help so many more people. And of course, when I write a book, that's just magnified. And, there are probably people who've read it who have probably never said that they liked it, and that's totally fine. But the opportunity to sort of go further and to reach more people and to know that I've made a difference was such a motivation for me. So that's really what made me want to be an author.
There is one picture that you put in there towards the end that I just love. It is being flexible is essential, where you have the little guy doing like some stretches at your side.
I love that. So my illustrator, Catherine, she's amazing. She's her company's Finch Creative, and I talked to her about this when I was finishing the book, and I remember sitting down and saying, I'd love some illustrations. And I had no idea sort of what illustrations I wanted, but I just knew I wanted some illustrations to kind of really bring some of the points home. And when she came back with some concept ideas, I just fell in love straight away. And that was her completely. So I identified the areas I think could be illustrated, but I also sort of said, hey, if there's anything else. And that illustration is probably one of my favorites, the little bean and all the little yoga poses and things. It's beautiful. Yeah, she did a great job in really bringing some of the concepts to life, and really even making me go, oh yeah, that is really what I'm trying to say. And what you've said in that illustration is probably better than what I've described in words, which is amazing. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with the job that she did.
Thanks for writing them.
Oh, you're most welcome. I loved writing them. I did. And I probably wrote the Agile Passion Project in response to people saying, hey, how do you write a book? So it's a really short book in how I wrote it, because I realized I wrote it in a very agile way, like started with a purpose and, did it in iterations and all that sort of stuff. So it was fun to write that as a little bit of an illustration to kind of bring that home. And again, just share, my knowledge and experience, on a wider scale. Then I can't have a coffee with every person that wants to have a chat with me. So, hey, this is me having a coffee with you.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do want to come back to this second book, but first, so you described who the book is for, but I'm also curious if you can share any tips or messages with us, that you share in this book.
Yeah, the big one in the Agile Project Manager was around the importance of having a clear goal and having a clear vision. And it's not just important for a project, for an initiative, or for anything, but for in your personal life as well. Like, why are you here? Like, why is that important? And the other big chapter for me was also thinking about the people around you. So when you start a project or any kind of initiative, you've got to think about who your people are that are going to help you with that, and also your stakeholders and things like that. And on a personal level, it's who's on your personal team. So who are the people that are going to help you as well? Like, who are your friends, your partner, just your close network around you. And I think for me, it was bringing those concepts to life to not just help people deliver change, but also to deal with life. Because I think so much of what we do, they say art imitates life. I think projects imitate life. I think so much of what we do is reflected both inside and out, personally and professionally. So I think the message I wanted to get across here was that these techniques are not just used in one context, they can be used across in everything. And if we can be more congruent with how we apply them to get work done as well as live life, then that's a really good thing. So that was the big message in that.
Then we have your second book, the Agile Passion Project, How to Write a Book with Agile. In relation to this book, I would love to hear your advice on what is required to become an author and where do you start? And what would you suggest for those who have an idea for a book, but something's holding them back? They just think, the idea might not be good enough or there's something preventing them from writing. What would your advice be to them?
It's a great question. I think the thing that got me going, because writing a book's not easy. It's not like you just sit down and just like the words come out and then you just get up and it's a masterpiece. There's a lot of work. As we were talking about before, consistent effort. There's a lot of writing. I think the first thing is to believe that your idea is valuable and just to know that it is. And if you're not sure, then for me, it was thinking about who this is for. So even though I said, the book is for my younger self, I really built a really clear avatar of this person. I thought about this person. It's a person either working on their first or second or maybe third project. And, they're thinking about how do I deliver this in the best way I can? Like, how do I get the most out of this? How do I navigate my way through life and work? And I really thought about that person and thought about the value I could bring to them. And for me, the motivation was I want them to have this book. So I need to write it for them. So it's really about who it's for. That's what I think is important. And I think when people are thinking about their book ideas and got this great idea, really think about who it's for and who it's going to benefit. And that's a motivation for me. That gets you writing. And the other advice is just write, just keep writing. The biggest aha moment I had when I was learning, I did writing courses. I did some courses with Catherine Devaney, and I did a course with Julie Postens as well, who is a master of self-publishing, which is incredible. But the big aha moment with working with them was writing is a little bit like, I don't know how to do this, but like if you're looking for gold and you've got a pick and you're chipping away trying to find gold and you're just chipping and nothing's there, but you just keep chipping and suddenly you find a vein of gold and you're like, oh, I found the gold. And that's something I didn't realize. Every time I tried to write something that was really awesome. And when I let that go and just started writing, thinking, it doesn't matter if no one reads this. And it was freedom to write, knowing that probably 2/3 of it, 3/4, 9/10, who knows, probably wasn't going to be read, but it was the writing process. And in the process of writing, that's when you find the gold. And I'd write like 3 pages, of which maybe 2 paragraphs have been like, that's actually what I need for my book. And that was something I didn't realize before writing. I thought, everything you wrote had to be amazing. And when I let go of that, that was a game changer.
Would you say that maybe for your next book will be a little bit easier to write than it was for the previous 3?
I don't know. I think in some ways, yes, because I know for me, I understand the process, but in some ways harder because you anticipate all the work. But easier, I think, yes, definitely in terms of process. And I think also there's a letting go as well to go. I know that when I sit down to write, it's okay if quite a bit of it isn't great because I'm just writing. And I know that the stuff that I want to say will emerge from that. And I think that's where a good editor is important as well, because a good editor will take all your kind of rambled thoughts and help sort of make sense of it as well. So that was because there's sort of 2 types of editing. There's the structural editing where the editor will say, hey, that thing you wrote there, that's awesome, but that really should be in chapter 2, not chapter 4. And then there's the copy editing, which is, okay, we need to make this sentence a sentence. So we need to do some work there with those commas and random exclamation marks, etc. So I think that's important. And I know for me, having a good relationship with my editors, they understood what I was trying to say. Like I'd say, this is overall what my book is trying to do. This is who it's for. They can help you craft that message. It's easier. And I love writing. Like I will often just write for enjoyment. Like I will just sit down and I will write something and I write not necessarily thinking this will be a blog post or this will be a chapter, but this is just an enjoyable thing to do, to just express myself. Who knows, it might not see the light of day and I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah, I also like the fact that when you mentioned that you give yourself the permission and freedom to just write without striving for perfection, because yes, striving for perfection and being perfectionist can often stand in the way, and yeah, they can definitely slow down progress.
Yes. And actually a friend of mine who is a copy editor in a previous life, and a few other people that are quite sort of switched on there, they can see the point in the Agile Project Manager when I stopped editing my own work. So the first couple of chapters, I think I And my editor was like, stop editing your work, just write and I will edit. And it was after that point, a few people went, yeah, I could really tell when you just stopped doing that because it reads a lot better. So hopefully not everyone can see that, but definitely if you've got copy experience, you can see. And my editor, that was the help of my editor, because I was sending her the chapters iteratively, agile style, so she was able to give me feedback and give me some early edits. And her first feedback was, please don't you edit, you write and I will edit. And that made a big difference.
Yes, and then we have the third book, High Performance Executive Leadership, 10 Surprising Myths That Senior Executives Must Break to Avoid Irrelevance. So very interesting words in there. So could you talk to what those myths are and what irrelevance means when talking about executive leadership? I'm very curious.
Yes, I was working with a mentor, and as part of working with the mentor, they actually help you sort of formulate an idea for a book, and the process is you sort of talk about what you do and some of the challenges you have, and in our conversations, in our coaching conversations, I was sort of reflecting on the stories that we tell ourselves in the corporate setting, and I was really looking at writing a book that started to connect my Navy experience with my corporate experience. So I truly believe you never leave anything behind. You never leave a job and go, that's it, I'm never going back to that. You always sort of take that with you and bring that experience, and that brings this richness and, amazingness to the next thing you do. And it helps you do what you do better than anyone else can do it. So I was looking at connecting those, and at the same time reflecting on these, stories we tell ourselves in corporate about how things are, and that's what sort of came up with the idea of these myths, or this stuff of legends. And if we think about how much the world has changed, we come back to that topic of change, and there's been so much change in the last 10, 20 years, and we've all experienced that. And there were things that were true probably in the 90s and the 80s that are not true now. And there are a lot of leaders that are still operating off those old truths because that's what got them successful. So that's sort of what kind of gave birth to these myths. And, part of the process was sort of brainstorming them. And one of the biggest myths, which I think is the first chapter, and it's about having control. And I think there's this sense for leaders of needing to be in control, of having control over everything, because that's what we do. And that was probably true in a very industrial age, maybe in a factory. You think about Taylorism, the whole theory X, theory Y of management. It's having that control was the right thing to do because you are managing things that were very linear. And we think about how much the world has changed. We've got nothing is linear in what we do. It's quite, it's a complex world. So we actually need to let go of control, and that way we actually have more control. So that was one of the myths that, fascinated me, that I explored a little bit and gave some examples of why that's a myth. And it was quite a learning journey for me to think there are some things that, I probably believe to be true. So I need to think about how they're not true and why I know they're not true. And so it was really good to be able to share that experience and give some tangible examples that hopefully help people think about how they lead and what things they might need to change as well. The other myth is probably related to control, and that's seeing people working. And this is really relevant at the moment with COVID. Obviously, I've worked for leaders that they need to see people busily tip-tap typing away. And, this culture of presenteeism, I walk in the door at 9, I'm like, I'm here, so my job has started, and then I walk out at 5. And of course, I wrote this pre-COVID. In fact, the launch was just before everything locked down. I'm so glad I had it when I did, because I wouldn't have had it otherwise. It was an awesome party. But, this is in the age of, trying to get people used to, there are people that possibly do their best work first thing in the morning. Like they get up and they can get like 3 hours of amazing work done in their pajamas, perhaps. And there are people that don't probably get into their own until later in the day and work into the night. And we need to sort of let go of the idea of people, being productive, sitting at their desks. I mean, and again, it goes back to sort of that Taylorism and factory working. Look at all those people being busy and this concept of busy work. And in Agile, we talk a lot about the importance of optimizing for flow. And so when we optimize for flow, we don't actually have an efficient system. It's inefficient, but it gets effective results. So it gets a customer result at the end. But the more we do that, the more efficient we become. But we've got to start with effectiveness, not efficiency. And actually this morning the Scaled Agile Summit is on, and Jeffrey Moore is a speaker, and he was talking about this. And and I'm a big fan of his, and he reiterated the importance of having effectiveness first, getting a result first, and then worrying about efficiency. And so much we worry about efficiency first, getting everything, resource efficiency, everyone working at 100%. And of course, when everyone's working 100%, we're not getting great results. But when we are okay with people maybe working at 80%, that's when we get throughput. So that's what that's all about, is, letting go of that people working all the time and thinking about how people are delivering value. And I was lucky. I don't think I used the example in the book, but years ago I was on a project, and Shane Elliott, the CEO of ANZ, was the sponsor, and he allowed us time to just pause and just go back and replan, because the project was sort of, in a bit of a state where we needed to stop and think about stuff. And we managed to find, I think, 5 or 6 weeks in the schedule just by stopping for a week. And I mean, you think about the value of that, that's incredible. You've got, up to 100 people working on a program, and you suddenly save like 5 or 6 weeks. That's a big cost saving. But of course, it was a big investment because we stopped and thought about it. And some of the decisions we made were we would have people working full time, even though we didn't need them full time. So in effect, we needed them 60 or 70 or 80%. So in other words, they could work 20% somewhere else. But we said, no, let's pay for them the whole time so we can have them the whole time, which enabled them to then work, on the project. And so it means we didn't have to wait for them to be available because they were working on something else. And that was probably my first practical example of the importance of throughput. So the example of my first practical experience in throughput, so valuing the work over the efficiency of, I'm paying for this person, so therefore I will get 100% value by having them 60% on one project and 20% another and 20% another and probably another 20% another, because even though that adds up to more than 100, we want them to be as busy as possible, so we're getting the maximum investment. I'm lucky that I've learnt that in the field, so I'm able to then use that tangible example. But that's another myth I think that exists, and I think there's quite a few myths that exist and we don't realize they're myths because there's so much part of our lives that we think that they're true, but when we reflect on them, so much has changed and we need to know that they're not true. So what do we need to do differently now?
Yeah, a lot of these examples reminded me of this book, Leadership is Language. I'm sure you're familiar, or are you familiar with that book?
Oh, I'm familiar. I don't think I've read it, but I'm familiar with the title.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It also uses an example, which is the captain of a ship who is the person making all the decisions, and in the end they run into a storm. And it's kind of like an agile book in a way, I think, or the different methodologies that it talks about. They are really agile approaches, and it's very, very interesting.
At the lighthouse story where the captain sees a light and they ask the light, I think I actually use that example. And you ask the captain asks the light, it doesn't realize it's a lighthouse, by the way, it just sees another ship and says, you should move for me. And they said, no, I won't. And they said, well, I'm, the admiral of the fleet or whatever, and you should move for me. And as it turns out, they're a lighthouse. And it just goes to show, yes, we need to be thinking about our context and understanding different perspectives, and not to be so rigid in how we work. I know that's a story that is quite popular, and I think a really big one, especially in our context now when we all need to be a bit flexible, no matter what our seniority or what our position is.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I think everyone, regardless of their role, should read your book, because at the end of the day, and I think this was our first guest who said that, Amanda, who said that you are a lead or a leader in whatever you were doing, right? Because you are leading something. It doesn't matter what your title says, but yeah, you should be the example of whatever you were doing. So as any team member of any team, I think everyone should read, especially the best book of yours, the Executive Leadership, the high performance one, because at the end of the day, it's all communication, right? So it doesn't matter which way the communication is coming, up or down or up, it's communication. So if you can get it right, like you said with the lighthouse, the thinking, oh, you have to change, the others have to change, I don't. So that's the approach of NLP in terms of neuro-linguistic programming, etc. Yeah, that's how I think we, regardless of our role, that we can be the best team player.
Yeah, and you're right. No matter what we're doing, we're leading, and we have no idea the impact we have on others. And just in how we show up in the morning, how we address people, how we show up on Zoom, obviously today, we are leading and we're role modeling and we're making an impact. So how we are, how we choose to be, makes a big difference. And while we might wish that everybody else was different and we didn't need to change, it's the changes that we make in ourselves have the biggest difference on the people around us. And that is bigger than we can ever realize. And even though, yes, I say it's big, I'm still surprised and in awe every time I'm presented with an example of that. So it's an ongoing journey for me, and it's important that we recognize our role in change and the impact we have as leaders, as team members. Thanks for the recommendation too, because I loved writing that. I loved sharing my experiences because I've experienced it, and I really, am enjoying sharing it and it making a difference to others.
That brings me to my next question. What are you curious about right now? What is the next thing you want to learn? Do you have plans to writing maybe a new book?
Yeah, I'm curious about so much. I am a Gallup strengths coach, and my number one strength is input, which is all about like bringing things in, like learning and growing and almost hoarding information. Every time I learn something, like I've written down book recommendations, I'll read those books. So I'm a voracious learner. So I'm really curious at the moment about how we're adapting to this new world of remote working that's going to be with us for a while, and really curious about the concept of adapting and adopting. So we can adapt to something that happens, but that's a bit of a temporary thing. But what do we choose to adopt and take on as like the new way of working? And I know the concept of new ways of working has been around for a while, but I guess I'm really curious about what that means long term, and how can I play a role in helping people on that journey. So that to me it's kind of like a working project, because it's something I'm working with clients on. So I'm working with clients on agile ways of working, new ways of working, remote working. How do we do that better? And are there some learnings we can take that we can really amplify and really help people on a larger scale? So I guess that's the sort of curiosity that I'm sitting at right now. Whether it's a book or not, I don't know, but it's definitely something that I'm pondering and thinking about more.
Sounds like a relevant topic to me.
Oh, well, I mean, it's like, it's almost like a bit of a, I listen to Tim Ferriss's podcast, you talk about lifestyle hacking. How do we hack this so we can do it better? Like there's probably an innate kind of problem with humanity that we think that everything has to be hard. But I'm like, how do we make it easy? How could we do this so that this is our life now? How do we, make the best of it and really thrive? How do we take our learnings and come out of this better? Because I really think there's an opportunity to come out of what we are going through better, because this is just the next part of the change journey. There's more change to go. It's not like we're going to come to the other end and just stop. Change is just accelerating. So how do we equip ourselves to be able to deal with that?
And anything else you would like to talk about?
Yeah, tools and technology. I use Evernote heaps to take notes like on the fly. And I've got a new iPad Pro and I use Notability. So that means I can write notes. So it means that and that's just because I am a notepad hoarder. So I normally, I'll just have notepads all over the place and I can't remember where anything is. Notability, I just write it all in and I've got all my notes in one place. So that's a great way of capturing thoughts and ideas and notes that I take if I'm listening to a webcast or anything like that. So that's probably the thing I'm absolutely loving at the moment. And it's a great way of capturing ideas. So I've got a notebook with just ideas. So if I think about something, I think I'll just write that down. And again, it's that freedom to sort of think, I'll just ponder that for a while. And that helps me keep everything together that I would totally love. And I've recommended Notability because if I have a PDF, I can download it and then I can write notes on the PDF. So it saves me printing things out as well. I can make it a note and then I can write over it and highlight it. And that to me sort of helps save paper and also saves me then losing it and wondering where it is.
And what about books? Has there been any book in particular that has shaped who you are today or has inspired you that you want to share?
Oh, I have so many books that I love. Patrick Lencioni's books are amazing. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I was lucky enough to meet him last year. I went to a lunch and got to meet him and sit with him and talk with him, which was incredible because he is amazing as a person and as an author. I like his writing because it's just so easy to read and the points really land because he writes it so well that you go, oh, yeah, I've got it. So yeah, he wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of Team and also The Advantage, which I love. And most recently, I've read a book, and I also got to meet the author just via webcast because he's based in the US. It's a book by Charlie Gilkey called Start Finishing. And it's one of those books that I read that I felt like it was written for me, and it was all about getting things done. And he talked about sort of that mindset that you need to have to really think about what's important to you, because I'm just sort of doing a few big projects at the moment. I'm doing my second online course, and I really needed to give it some focus, and it really helped me sort of give me that container. So that was a great book that I've read recently. And another book, Yuval Noah Harari, he wrote Sapiens and also Homo Deus. So I'm just finishing Homo Deus. Long books, and just amazing. And I feel like I need to listen to it again, because even though I'm listening to it, I'm like, there's so much here I'm not taking in. Like, there's so much that I'm going, wow, but I know I need to listen to again. But yeah, amazing books, just lots of thinking to do on the human condition and who we are and why we are how we are, and so much.
Yeah, I love Sapiens, and I also listen to Homo Deus, but yeah, I'm the same way. Like, I have to listen to it again.
Yes, I almost want to pause and take notes, but I've try to just listen, knowing that the important things will land and I can always listen to it again, because otherwise I'd be pausing all the time and writing notes, and then so I'm just listening to it and taking it in, and really enjoying it. I've really loved this. It's been a great conversation. It's really got me thinking about a few things as well. Like, just that importance of the role we play in change and the role we play as leaders. It's just been a great conversation.
Yeah, we thank you to have accepted and, having this time. And like I said, we probably would need another 2 or 3 sessions of this.
Thank you for inviting me to chat with you and share my thoughts and be part of your podcast. I feel really lucky. Thank you.
So how can people connect with you?
So my LinkedIn, I'm Emma Sharrock on LinkedIn, and the agileprojectmanager.com.au. That's where I blog quite regularly. I'm doing a Strengths in Uncertainty series at the moment. So I'm interviewing people on how they've been using their strengths at this time of uncertainty, which has been really, really interesting to sort of stretch myself into, sort of finding out a little bit more about strengths and writing a bit about that, which has been good. So there's a few blog posts about that. So there's the 2 main places you can find me.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Emma. This was really fun, hearing about astronavigation and learning about change. I really had a lot of fun today. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much. It was really great to share with you my experience. And it was fun just to have a chat, and it got me thinking about a bunch of stuff, which is always inspiring to talk to people like you that just sort of prompt that thinking and ideas, which is really cool.